are in the afternoon program of day 2. We've got a fantastic talk coming up. And we've got Elena Contreras here. Elena is a veterinarian and a resident in the American College of Animal Welfare. Elena is faculty and teaching animal behavior and welfare at a brand new university in New Jersey, USA. This university is called Rowan University, and she's going to talk about rescued adult broiler chickens. So here we have, yes.
Thanks so much. Thank you for letting me tell you about this very preliminary data for this very pilot study. Thank you. And Rowan is a new vet school in New Jersey. So, okay, here we are. So, ta-da. So who are we talking about today? We're going to be talking about the broiler chicken, the meat chicken that you all, I'm sure, are familiar with. They are bred to grow at a very fast rate, so they can be slaughtered early by the time they're about 5 to 7 weeks, if they're the fast-growing type. This fast growth leads to a variety of welfare issues associated with their health. Their fast growth and large breast muscle size and body can lead to immobility, lameness, skeletal deformities, some cardiovascular disease. Their high metabolic rate and need for oxygen can lead to pulmonary hypertension. There have been many studies, many behavioral studies using ethograms to characterize the behaviors of the broilers in production when they're up to 6 weeks of age before slaughter. And for the most part, their behaviors while they're in this industry, as they age up to 6 weeks or whenever their slaughter weight or age is, they spend most of their time lying down, about 76% of the time. And then if they're lame, they spend most of their time lying down, of course. 86%. Most of the observations from these ethograms are the chickens spend doing passive behaviors, so as opposed to active behaviors. And then they become even less active as they age, meaning aging to 6 to 8 weeks. They move around 3 to 7% of the time, and they even do their preening behavior while they're lying down mostly. And they forage for only 1 to 10% of the time in general. So there are also adult broiler breeders. As our first presenter today mentioned, they have different welfare issues, and that mostly comes from feed restrictions. So because they don't want them to be the obese little baby broilers not being able to move since they have to mate, right? Okay, so the feed restriction, what does that lead to? The welfare concerns, mostly aggression, as our speaker talked about. They have some oral stereotypies, pacing, the pecking, I guess, on walls, maybe eating the walls, this chronic hunger, drinking a lot, polydipsia, and cannibalism, vent cannibalism, just pecking each other. So all of these behaviors related to this feed restriction that is employed so that they don't grow too big. So I'm a veterinarian. The question can be posed by clients, and this is a not uncommon thing that can happen, is sometimes chickens fall off a truck on their way to slaughter. Some people find them, they want to take care of them, or sometimes clients, they buy little broiler chicks from their farm supply store, and they want to grow them up and eat them, but then say their children get very attached because they're very friendly. They're friendly like little broiler chicks. And the kids get attached, and so they don't want to slaughter them. They don't want to eat them. So they might ask, well, what can we just raise them as pets? Can we have them as pets? And so, well, as a veterinarian, if I look to the literature, what does it say? Well, either one, they're the little obese babies who can't move and have heart disease, or two, they're the adult cannibalistic like monsters, you know, eating each other. So we have those options. And so, you know, I wonder, can they survive? And so these are just some phrases, some statements I've heard throughout the years, some critics of, can we keep these as adults? And some of these statements are from veterinarians, some from poultry associations, some from good old Dr. Google and social media, the best way to get your information. So the kindest thing you can do for them is to eat them. Now, as a veterinarian, that's usually not what I would tell a client about an animal that they want as a pet, but you know, whatever. Culling and processing is much more humane. And then this, you know, with the right approach, you know, there are some that can live up to 12 to 16 weeks, but then after that, you know, forget it. They all die of obesity and heart attacks. That was from a veterinarian colleague of mine. They die young, their bodies outgrow their internal organs, and their hearts especially can't keep up. It's cruel to keep them alive. And my favorite, they can't fly and they're slow moving. Okay, so what do we say to those? Okay, throw that away. Behold, the flying Cornish. I'm not sure if you can you can see these rubble, but I'm pretty sure like that girl is supposed to be like in the coop, right, not on top of the coop, and that one, you know, she's like flying up on top of this metal enclosure. Anyway, so fly away these myths. Okay, so anecdotally, farm sanctuaries anecdotally report successfully managing some of these older commercial broiler hybrids, these Cornish crosses, by regulating their food intake and providing enriching environments. So some farm sanctuaries, the one over on the left-hand side, they did some research, kind of looking at cognitive capacities and just different tests that the Cornish crosses did. This sanctuary here, they put out a whole bunch of information online to help people who want to maybe raise these Cornish chickens. And then a lot of these rescues come from, granted, there are the individual ones, but a lot of the big bulk of rescues come from these Kaporos ceremonies that happen, I don't know, in New York City, Brooklyn, Queens at a certain time of the year. And so they rescue hundreds of these each year, over 4,000 since 2013. And then I asked ChatGPT, I put in a lot of parameters, said, hey, can you estimate, because, who has numbers of this? How many do you think are living in North America, today as pets? And so I gave it a bunch of parameters, and it said it's probably like an overestimation, but they said, maybe around 7,000 to 15,000. Who knows? So they're, living as pets. But with all that being said, there aren't any quantified or published studies anywhere in the scientific literature about the behaviors or whether or not these birds do experience good or poor welfare. There are no behavioral observations related to these birds other than just anecdotally. So brings us to the study. So what are the aims? To characterize the behavioral repertoire of a very small set pilot of adult Cornishes raised after being rescued from slaughter, because there are none of these studies to date. The objectives are to employ an ethogram to document these behaviors and to establish this foundational framework for subsequent comprehensive studies. The hypotheses are that these birds living in sanctuary or pet environments will be healthy and have activity levels and behaviors that reflect positive welfare. And the activity levels and behaviors will differ from those reported for Cornish crosses in production environments. So the method. So this was their environment. So the participants were 5 adults. I know, like small number, but just like preliminary data, so bear with me. 5 adult females, and they range from 2 to 3 years of age. They all were rescued from Kaporo ceremonies, so slaughter age. The environment was this. It was like a 49-meter square. Basically what it is, it's a large double-car garage converted into a workshop, converted into a chicken habitat. So it was climate controlled. It was climate I don't know if I have the cursor there. Oh, anyway, so it was climate controlled. There natural lighting. So some of those rectangles up there, those are windows, and of course there was like artificial lighting too, lights on and off. Enrichment items included. Well, the ground is a bunch of leaves and natural dirt, branches. There are a bunch of cat boxes, cat crates. Other little things for them to jump on, little perches, little things that they can kick around in the floor. So a bunch of enrichment items. And so established ethograms were supplemented and used to record 11 active behaviors that used to categorize all the behaviors that the birds were doing. So the active behaviors included locomotion, so moving around, standing alert, preening, drinking. They all stood up while they drank. Dust bathing, foraging. That's kind of a picture of one kind of scratching in the ground there. Pecking, they're conspecific. Interacting or pecking at objects, walking on a human. So for some of the observations, a human observer was observing live in the room, not interacting with them, but sitting there. And so that was recorded too. And then passive behaviors would include like resting, standing, squatting, sitting in a nest box, or resting or lying on top of the human. So legs, and so like the bird is that's a passive behavior, and then the other one's coming up to like interact with the observer. Okay, and then also proximity to human was measured just by bullet points in the room, indicating where a distance was. So there were 30-minute observation periods between 8:30 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. And that would be after breakfast and before dinner. So they fed in meals just like dogs or cats. Anyway, so that their behavior wasn't eating, right? So it was after that. So it was after breakfast or before dinner. And it was a focal sampling of all the behaviors that the bird was doing for a minute, for 5 minutes, and then repeated 4 times within a 30-minute period. And so that each 30-minute period would acquire 100 sample points per each behavior in each period. And this was just done for 1 week in the wintertime. And the times that the sampling was done was throughout the day to get a good distribution of all of the behaviors that they were doing all throughout the day. And if they were done, all of this was done live, either live sitting with the chickens or remote live by Wisecam. So not recorded, but just watching live. And there were only 5 of them. So it's not like, it's that complicated. And so during live, there was human presence there. And then also health parameters were recorded. Obviously, they were live, like, they're not after slaughter health parameters. And just to get an idea, so like that was a table that was used, and descriptive statistics only. This is not worthy of actual statistics. So of all the sample points for each behavior, they calculated the percentage of the sample points per each behavior of all the potential things that they could be doing, right? And so I know, scientifically we're supposed to number our subjects, but whatever, they had names, okay? So, and the behaviors weren't mutually exclusive, right? Because it's over a minute, and so you can capture them. They can be foraging, and then they can be walking around somewhere else. So what were the results? So overall, behaviors they engaged in throughout the day, 74% of their behaviors. So grouping all of the behaviors together, 74% were active behaviors, and 26% were inactive. And then what do those active behaviors consist of? So 41% of the time they were foraging around and all that material. And sometimes they were just walking around, just whatever. Sometimes they, hop up and they look out the window. And 20% of the time they were preening. They were interacting with their object 18% of the time, drinking 8%, and then doing other things like stretching or like flapping their wings or ruffling their feathers or whatever for 4%. So in terms of the results of when the observer was in the room, So 14% of the time they were resting on the observer. And again, the observer wasn't interacting with them. They would just go and then just go hop on the observer. And then another 14% of the time, chicken was coming to interact with the observer. So this was a problem. So while the observer was in the room, 78% of the observations, the chickens were like around the observer. Yeah. So a little bit of a confounding variable there. So, okay, health-wise, the gait score, there were no gait abnormalities. They didn't have any hock burn. Again, they were still alive when assessing this. Pododermatitis, a couple of them had maybe a score of 1 out of 4 for pododermatitis. And feather cover, they had beautiful feather cover. They weren't missing any feathers, and their plumage was not dirty. Okay. So what do we take away from this? So the activity levels and the behaviors, they markedly differed in this cohort of adult Cornish crosses, granted a very small sample size, as compared to activity levels and behaviors reported for the young Cornish crosses in production settings, and also different from the broiler breeders. I mean, they weren't, well, wait, I'll get to that. So, okay, they were active for 74% of the time versus that same amount of time with the babies in the production settings where they're usually lying down 70% of the time. These chickens, they forage around in the material around 41% of the time versus, 1 to 10%. And they had full plumage. There wasn't aggression. There wasn't fighting or feather pecking. They weren't cannibalizing each other. So that's good. And so, so limited sample size, but the findings challenge the assumptions and suggest that adult Cornish crosses can, with proper care and attention, lead healthy lives with positive welfare. And this pilot just establishes the foundation for our subsequent expansive project that will incorporate additional sample points, diagnostics, and larger cohorts in sanctuary and companion settings. And that's what's planned for follow-up. That's Tamerlane Sanctuary, the one that we'll be doing this with, and trying to meet chickens with a better quality of life. So, thanks.